Losing my mom destroyed me. She had always been the heart of our home. My father did his best to raise me alone, but grief changes people. He worked longer hours, smiled less, and buried himself in work because it was easier than facing the silence in our house. 3 years later, he met Linda. At first, she seemed kind. She brought homemade cookies whenever she visited. She complimented my grades, asked about school, and told everyone how lucky she felt to meet my. I wanted to believe she cared. My dad married her within a year. That's when everything changed. The woman who had acted sweet suddenly became controlling. Every decision in the house had to go through her. The pictures of my mom slowly disappeared from the walls. My mother's favorite furniture was donated without asking me or my dad. Whenever I mentioned my mom, Linda would sigh dramatically and say, "You need to move on, Ethan. Living in the past isn't healthy." I was 16, and every memory of my mother felt like it was being erased. Dad noticed some of it, but every time I brought up Linda's behavior, she'd somehow convince him I was simply struggling to accept change. And honestly, maybe I was. So I kept quiet. After high school, I earned a scholarship to a state university. Leaving home felt like escaping. While I was in college, Dad called me every Sunday. We talked about classes, football, and life. But Linda was always in the background, interrupting our conversations. Eventually, the calls became shorter. Then less. When I graduated with a business degree, I got my first real job in another city. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was enough to start building my own future. Dad told me he was proud. Those words meant everything to me. Over the next few years, I visited home whenever I could. Every visit felt different. Linda had slowly taken over every part of my father's life. She handled his finances. She answered his phone. She even insisted on sitting beside him during every conversation. Sometimes, Dad looked tired. Older than he really was. One evening, while helping him clean the garage, he quietly handed me a small envelope. "Keep this safe," he whispered. Inside was a handwritten letter. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to his lawyer. He looked me in the eye. "If anything happens to me, make sure this reaches him." I asked what it was. He smiled weakly. "Just promise." I promised. At the time, I didn't think much of it. A year later, I got the phone call that changed everything. Dad had suffered a heart attack. He didn't survive. The drive home was a blur. When I arrived, Linda was already greeting relatives at the house. She hugged me dramatically, crying louder than anyone else. But something felt fake. After the funeral, I asked about Dad's lawyer. Linda's expression changed instantly. "Everything has already been handled," she said. "What do you mean?" "Your father updated his will before he died." I froze. Updated? Dad had never mentioned changing anything. She handed me a folder. According to the document, nearly everything went to Linda. The savings. His retirement accounts. His investment portfolio. Even my mother's jewelry. My name appeared exactly once. I inherited Dad's old pickup truck. That was it. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Dad had spent years telling me he'd worked hard to make sure I'd never struggle the way he did growing up. None of this made sense. I told Linda the will had to be wrong. She shrugged. People change their minds. I left without saying another word. That night, I remembered the envelope. The one Dad had secretly given me. It was still locked inside my apartment safe. The next morning, I drove back to the city as fast as I could. When I opened the envelope, my hands were shaking. Inside was the original letter. Dad had written that he feared someone was trying to pressure him into changing his estate plan. He specifically instructed his attorney that if any suspicious documents appeared after his death, they should be investigated immediately. Attached was a copy of an older estate summary. According to that document, I was supposed to inherit almost everything. The house. The investments. The family cabin. Even the antique watch collection my grandfather had left him. My heart started racing. Had Linda somehow changed everything? I immediately called the attorney whose name appeared in the letter. He sounded shocked. "Ethan. I never received this." "What do you mean?" "Your father asked me to contact him after his annual medical appointment, but Linda canceled every meeting for almost a year. The lawyer agreed to meet me the next morning. When I showed him the letter, he became very quiet. Then he looked directly at me. This changes everything. For the first time since my father's death, I realized I wasn't imagining things. Something was seriously wrong. And I was finally going to find out just how far Linda had gone to steal my father's legacy." The attorney leaned back in his chair and stared at my father's letter for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he broke the silence. "Ethan, if this letter is authentic, and I have every reason to believe it is, we may be dealing with fraud." Those words hit me like a truck. Fraud. I had spent weeks wondering if my father had truly changed his mind about me. Now, for the first time, there was hope that he hadn't. The attorney immediately requested copies of every estate document filed after my father's death. When they arrived a few days later, something strange stood out. At first glance, it resembled my father's handwriting. But the longer I looked, the more obvious the differences became. The attorney didn't want to rely on suspicion alone, so he hired a professional handwriting examiner. Waiting for the results was torture. Every day I replayed memories of my father in my head. I remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike, helping me with homework, and telling me that integrity was worth more than money. He would never have wanted his family torn apart like this. A week later, the expert's report arrived. The signature had a high probability of being forged. I felt sick. The attorney immediately filed a petition asking the court to freeze the estate until the investigation was complete. Linda was furious. Within hours, she called me. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she screamed. "Your father trusted me. You're trying to destroy his final wishes." I calmly replied, "If those really were his wishes, the investigation will prove it." She hung up. That was the last friendly conversation we ever had. Over the next several months, investigators uncovered details I never could have imagined. Linda had quietly convinced my father to give her complete control over his finances during the last year of his life. She changed passwords on his online banking accounts. She redirected important mail. She canceled appointments with his attorney. She even isolated him from several longtime friends who later admitted they hadn't spoken to him in months. Then came the biggest discovery. Security footage from the law office showed that on the day the so-called new will was supposedly signed, my father never entered the building. Only Linda did. The notary whose name appeared on the document also admitted under questioning that she never personally witnessed my father sign anything. The case quickly shifted from a family dispute to a criminal investigation. For the first time, Linda looked nervous. During the court hearings, she insisted everything had been done legally. But every week, another piece of evidence appeared. Bank records. Phone records. Emails. Witness statements. Everything pointed in the same direction. She had manipulated a grieving, aging man for years. The judge eventually ruled that the disputed will was invalid. My father's previous estate plan, the one he had intended all along, was officially restored. Legally, I inherited the family home, the investments, and the rest of the estate. Linda was ordered to return assets she had already transferred to herself. Some of the money had already been spent on luxury vacations, designer handbags, expensive jewelry, and a brand new luxury SUV. She couldn't repay everything immediately. Many of her assets were seized. Civil lawsuits followed. Later, prosecutors filed criminal charges related to fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. Watching it unfold didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel exhausted. I had spent nearly 2 years fighting for something that should never have been taken in the first place. When everything was finally over, I walked into my childhood home alone. The house felt strangely quiet. I opened a hallway closet and found a dusty cardboard box tucked behind old blankets. Inside were dozens of family photo albums. Pictures of my mother holding me as a baby. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Camping trips with my father. I realized Linda hadn't thrown everything away. She had simply hidden the memories. I spent hours looking through every photograph. For the first time since my father's death, I cried. Not because of the inheritance. Not because of the lawsuit. But because I missed my parents. Money can replace furniture. It can repair a house. It can rebuild savings. But it can never replace the people who made those things meaningful. A few months later, I made a decision. Instead of keeping the large house to myself, I sold it. Many people thought I was crazy. But I didn't need a building filled with painful memories. I used part of the inheritance to start the small business I had always dreamed about. It wasn't glamorous. The first year was difficult. Some months I barely broke even. But slowly, things improved. Within 5 years, the company employed more than 40 people. Every Christmas, we gave generous bonuses because I remembered what my father always said. If you're fortunate enough to succeed, help someone else succeed too. I also created a scholarship in my mother's name for students who had lost a parent. Every year, meeting those young people reminded me why kindness matters. One afternoon, nearly 7 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Linda. She wrote that prison had forced her to confront the choices she had made. She apologized for manipulating my father. She admitted that jealousy had consumed her after realizing how much he loved me. She asked for forgiveness. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. I never replied. Not because I hated her. But because forgiveness doesn't always require another conversation. Sometimes, peace comes from simply choosing not to carry the anger anymore. Today, people occasionally ask whether I fought for the inheritance because of the money. The answer is always the same. No. I fought because my father's voice deserved to be heard. He spent his entire life working to protect the people he loved. Someone tried to erase those final wishes. I couldn't allow that to happen. Starting over wasn't easy. In many ways, I truly did lose everything. But rebuilding my life taught me something my father had been trying to teach me all along. Your greatest inheritance isn't a house, a bank account, or a piece of land. It's your character. Because money can be stolen. Property can be taken. Documents can be forged. But integrity. That's the one thing no one can ever steal from you.